The moment my parents spotted me across the crowded wedding reception, their faces twisted with disgust. Dad grabbed Mom's arm and marched straight toward me. "Why is this unwanted piece here?" Mom hissed loud enough for nearby guests to hear. My sister Chloe, radiant in her wedding gown, froze mid-laugh with her bridesmaids. Before I could respond, her new husband Daniel went pale as Chalk dropped his champagne glass and shouted across the entire reception hall, "Silence this person is." 10 years ago, when I was 18 and full of dreams, I thought my biggest challenge would be choosing between Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. All three universities had accepted me with academic scholarships that covered 70% of tuition. I just needed help with the remaining $30,000 per year and living expenses. My grades had been perfect throughout high school. I'd been valedictorian, and I'd spent countless nights studying while working part-time at the local diner to save money for college applications. I remember walking into our family's cozy suburban kitchen that April morning, acceptance letters spread across the granite countertop like golden tickets to my future. Mom was brewing coffee and Dad sat reading his morning paper. The sunlight streaming through our yellow gingham curtains felt warm with possibility. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about college funding," I said, my voice trembling with excitement and nervousness. Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Ernestine, your mother and I have been discussing this extensively. We believe the best thing for your character development is complete independence. You should learn to support yourself without relying on family money." My stomach dropped. "But what about Chloe? You just paid $35,000 for her first year at the Rhode Island School of Design." Mom set down her coffee mug with a sharp clink. "Chloe has genuine artistic talent that deserves investment. Her portfolio showed remarkable creativity and potential for commercial success. My academic achievements don't deserve investment." The words came out sharper than I intended. "Academic success is admirable, Earnestine, but it doesn't guarantee financial returns like artistic ability can," Dad replied, his tone growing cold. "Besides struggling through college on your own, will build the resilience you'll need in the real world." I stared at them, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "So Chloe gets full support for art school, but I have to figure out Harvard on my own. Independence builds character," Mom said, already turning back to her morning routine. "You're smart enough to find scholarships or student loans." That afternoon, while they were at Chloe's art exhibition downtown, I searched through Dad's home office for our family financial records. What I discovered made my blood run ice cold. There was a college savings account with my name on it, containing $47,000 that had been accumulating since my birth. But according to the recent bank statements, $39,000 had been transferred out just 2 weeks prior to our conversation. I dug deeper through the files and found travel agency receipts. My parents had booked a 6-week European vacation package costing exactly $39,000, scheduled to begin right after my high school graduation. While I would be spending my summer working double shifts to afford community college, they planned to tour France, Italy, and Spain. The final devastating piece of evidence was a handwritten note in Mom's distinctive cursive paperclip to Chloe's art school invoices. "Chloe's talent is worth every penny. At least one daughter will make us proud and successful." I sat alone in Dad's leather office chair, surrounded by the evidence of their deliberate betrayal, and understood with crystal clarity that I had never been an equally loved child in this house. I had been tolerated, expected to be grateful for basic necessities, while Chloe was cherished and invested in as their hope for future success and social status. That evening, when they returned from Chloe's exhibition glowing with pride over her latest painting sales, I confronted them with the bank statements and travel receipts spread across the dinner table. "You took my college money for your vacation," I said quietly. Dad's jaw tightened. "That money was never designated specifically for your education, Earnestine. It was family savings that we chose to use for family experiences. Family experiences that I'm apparently not included in since I'll be working all summer while you're traveling through Europe." Mom sighed dramatically. "You're being completely unreasonable and ungrateful. We've provided you with food, shelter, and education for 18 years. That's more than many children receive. Chloe got the same basic necessities plus $40,000 in art school funding, plus emotional support for her dreams," I shot back. "Chloe appreciates what we do for her," Dad snapped. "She doesn't throw accusations and demands at us like some entitled teenager. Because she's never had to fight for equal treatment." The argument escalated until Mom finally screamed, "If you're so unhappy with our parenting, perhaps you should leave and see how well you manage completely on your own." The house fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing paint-splattered clothes from her exhibition, staring at the scattered financial documents with wide eyes. "You're taking money from Ernestine's college fund for vacation?" she asked quietly. "Stay out of this, Chloe," Dad warned. But something in my sister's expression looked almost guilty, as if she'd suspected this inequality all along, but never questioned it because it benefited her. I stood up slowly, gathering the bank statements. "You're right, Mom. I should see how well I manage on my own." Over the next 3 days, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. I had saved $4,000 from my diner job, which would cover a security deposit and first month's rent for a studio apartment across town. I'd already applied for every scholarship and student loan available enough to cover community college tuition while I worked full-time. The morning I left, Chloe tried to give me $500 from her art sales. "Take this, please. I feel terrible about the college money." I hugged her tightly. "Keep it for your supplies. This isn't your fault." My parents watched from the living room window as I loaded my car, their faces expressionless. Neither came outside to say goodbye. As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, I promised myself that someday I would be successful enough that their approval or money would be completely irrelevant to my happiness. I had no idea that keeping that promise would take me far beyond my wildest dreams of revenge or vindication. Community college was nothing like the prestigious university experience I'd planned, but it became the foundation for everything that followed. I rented a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat, sharing the space with 2 other students to split the $600 monthly rent. My roommates were Maria, a nursing student whose parents had immigrated from Mexico, and Jamie, a computer science major putting himself through school after aging out of foster care. We became an unlikely family, sharing groceries bought with coupons, taking turns cooking cheap meals like spaghetti and ramen noodles, and studying together at the tiny kitchen table under a flickering fluorescent light. None of us had family money, but we had determination and a fierce loyalty to each other's success. During the day, I attended business and accounting classes, maintaining a 4.0 grade average. Evenings were spent working at various part-time jobs 3 nights a week, at the diner where I'd worked in high school, weekend shifts at a retail clothing store, and Sunday mornings cleaning offices downtown. But it was the night janitor position at Morrison & Associates investment firm that changed everything. I started working there during my 2nd semester, taking the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift that paid $12 an hour, $3 above minimum wage. The building was a sleek glass tower in the financial district, and I was responsible for cleaning the executive floors, where major investment decisions happened daily. Morrison and Associates specialized in corporate restructuring and family business rescue operations. They helped struggling companies reorganize their finances to avoid bankruptcy, and they had a reputation for turning failing enterprises into profitable ventures through strategic planning and smart investments. During my first week, I noticed that several offices stayed occupied well past normal business hours. Senior partners and analysts would work until 2 or 3 in the morning making phone calls to international markets and analyzing complex financial data on multiple computer screens. I learned to clean quietly around them, emptying trash cans and dusting surfaces while they debated investment strategies and market predictions. Initially, I tried not to listen to their conversations, focusing on my work and earning my paycheck. But their discussions were fascinating in a way that my textbook accounting classes never captured. One night in March, I was cleaning the conference room when I overheard senior partner Thomas Morrison arguing with 2 junior analysts about a potential investment in a struggling automotive parts manufacturer. "The numbers don't support the risk," one analyst insisted. "Their debt-to-equity ratio has been climbing for 6 quarters straight." "But their core manufacturing capabilities are sound," the other analyst countered. "They just need better supply chain management and updated equipment." Thomas Morrison looked exhausted, running his hands through his graying hair. "We need to make a decision by tomorrow morning. Our client has 48 hours to accept or decline the buyout offer." I continued wiping down the conference table, but I couldn't help noticing the spreadsheets and financial reports spread across the surface. Having spent months studying similar documents in my accounting classes, I recognized the patterns immediately. After they left for the night, I found myself staring at the documents they'd left behind. The automotive parts company's financial records showed a clear problem that none of the analysts had mentioned in their discussion. Their accounts receivable had increased by 30% over the past year, but their accounts payable had remained constant. This suggested that customers were taking longer to pay their bills, which often indicated quality control problems or customer dissatisfaction. I spent my lunch break the next evening researching the company online using the public computers in the building's lobby. Sure enough, recent industry reports mentioned multiple recalls of their products due to defective components, and several major automotive manufacturers had switched to different suppliers. The investment would be a disaster, but not for the reasons the analysts had identified. I debated for 3 days whether to say anything. These were highly educated financial professionals with decades of experience, and I was a 19-year-old community college student who cleaned their offices. What right did I have to question their analysis? But 48 hours before the investment deadline, I overheard Thomas Morrison on a late-night phone call with the client, recommending they proceed with the purchase despite his lingering concerns. I made a decision that terrified me, but felt morally necessary. The next morning, I wrote a detailed memo explaining my observations about the accounts receivable patterns and the industry reports I'd found. I included copies of the recall notices and customer satisfaction surveys I'd discovered through online research. At the bottom, I wrote, "I apologize for overstepping my position, but this information might be relevant to your investment decision. Respectfully, Earnestine Night Cleaning Staff." I left the memo on Thomas Morrison's desk and spent the entire day convinced I would be fired. Instead, he called me into his office the following evening. Thomas Morrison was a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law and finance books, and framed photos of his family covered his desk. "Earnestine, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "I read your memo about the automotive investment." My heart pounded. Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry if I overstepped my boundaries. I just thought the information might be useful. You potentially saved our client from losing $4 million, he said quietly. We contacted the automotive company's former customers based on your research and discovered quality control problems that weren't reflected in their official financial statements. The investment would have been catastrophic. I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. Where did you learn to analyze financial documents like this? He asked. Community college accounting classes mostly, and I've always been good with numbers and patterns. He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. What are your career plans? Earnestine, I'm hoping to transfer to a 4-year university next year to study business and finance. I want to work in corporate financial analysis someday. What if I told you that you could start working in financial analysis right now while continuing your education part-time? We have an entry-level analyst position that includes tuition reimbursement for relevant coursework. The offer felt like a dream that couldn't possibly be real. Mr. Morrison, I don't have a 4-year degree or any formal experience. You have analytical intelligence that can't be taught, and attention to detail that most of our graduate-level hires lack. The degree is just paperwork. The ability to see patterns that others miss is a gift. That conversation launched the next phase of my life. I transitioned from night janitor to junior analyst within 2 weeks, earning $38,000 annually, plus full tuition coverage for business courses at the local university. Maria and Jamie celebrated with me the night I signed my employment contract, opening a bottle of cheap champagne that Jamie had been saving for when he landed his first programming job. We toasted to second chances and refusing to let our circumstances define our futures. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt like my life was moving in a direction I had chosen, rather than one that had been forced upon me by other people's decisions. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a journey that would eventually give me power I never imagined possessing. Working at Morrison & Associates was like attending an advanced university program in real-world financial strategy. Every day brought new challenges and learning opportunities that stretched my analytical abilities in ways my textbook education never could have prepared me for. Thomas Morrison became an unofficial mentor, assigning me increasingly complex projects and encouraging me to develop my own approaches to financial analysis. Within 6 months, I was handling small business restructuring cases, independently helping family-owned restaurants and retail shops reorganize their debt and improve their cash flow management. My specialty became identifying underlying problems that traditional financial analysis missed. While other analysts focused on balance sheets and profit margins, I developed a systematic approach to researching company culture, employee satisfaction, customer feedback, and market positioning. Often businesses failed not because of poor financial management, but because of deeper operational issues that numbers alone couldn't reveal. During my second year with the firm, I worked on a case that would define my reputation in the industry. A regional pharmacy chain with 12 locations was facing bankruptcy despite appearing profitable on paper. The owners couldn't understand why they were losing customers to larger corporate chains when their prices were competitive and their locations were convenient. I spent 2 weeks visiting each pharmacy location during different shifts, observing customer interactions and employee behavior. What I discovered was that the staff had become demoralized due to understaffing and inadequate training, leading to long wait times and frequent prescription errors. Customers were switching to competitors, not because of price or convenience, but because they didn't trust the service quality. My recommendation was unconventional. Instead of cutting costs through further staffing reductions, the company needed to invest in employee training and hire additional pharmacists to reduce wait times. I projected that improving customer satisfaction would increase revenue enough to offset the higher labor costs within 18 months. The pharmacy owners were skeptical, but Thomas Morrison supported my analysis. The strategy worked exactly as predicted. Customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically, prescription volume increased by 40%, and the company became profitable enough to open 3 additional locations within 2 years. Word of my success with the pharmacy chain spread throughout the regional business community, and Morrison & Associates began receiving requests specifically for my analytical services. Thomas Morrison made me a senior associate after just 3 years with the firm, and by my 5th year, I was earning $85,000 annually, plus profit-sharing bonuses. But it was during my 6th year that I encountered a case that would bring my past colliding with my present in an unexpected way. I was reviewing a portfolio of struggling small businesses when one company name caught my attention: Henderson Family Markets. My parents, Robert and Patricia Henderson, owned a small chain of 4 grocery stores in our hometown and the surrounding communities. According to the financial documents, Henderson Family Markets was drowning in debt. They had taken multiple loans against their properties to fund expansion efforts that hadn't generated the expected revenue. The business was hemorrhaging money due to poor inventory management, outdated point-of-sale systems, and competition from a new Walmart supercenter that had opened 2 miles from their flagship location. They owed $137,000 to various creditors, and the loan documents showed they had mortgaged their house as collateral for a business development loan. If Henderson Family Markets declared bankruptcy, my parents would lose both their business and their home. I sat in my office staring at the familiar address of my childhood home, listed as collateral, feeling a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't immediately untangle. Part of me felt vindicated seeing my parents face financial struggles after they had dismissed my need for college funding. But a larger part of me felt sad seeing the evidence of poor business decisions that could have been avoided with proper financial planning. The case had been referred to Morrison & Associates by Pinnacle Recovery Solutions, a debt collection company that specialized in family business restructuring. Pinnacle owned the consolidated debt and was exploring options for recovery before initiating foreclosure proceedings. I made a decision that surprised even myself. Using personal savings I had accumulated over 5 years of careful investing, I approached Pinnacle Recovery Solutions with an offer to purchase Henderson Family Markets' debt portfolio at a 20% discount. This was a standard practice in debt recovery, allowing creditors to receive immediate payment while transferring the collection risk to a third party. Pinnacle accepted my offer, and I became the primary creditor for my parents' business and home mortgage. I wasn't seeking revenge or planning to foreclose on their property. Instead, I was positioning myself to offer them a sustainable payment restructuring that could save both their business and their house, while demonstrating the kind of financial expertise they had dismissed when I was 18 years old. Through a legal firm, I sent a formal notice to Henderson Family Markets offering debt consolidation and restructuring services. The communication was entirely professional, signed by attorneys who didn't mention my involvement. From my parents' perspective, this was simply another business service company offering help with their financial difficulties. Meanwhile, my personal life was becoming more fulfilling than I had ever imagined possible during those difficult years in community college. I had moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment downtown, furnished with quality pieces that I purchased with bonuses from successful cases. Maria had become a registered nurse and was working at the regional medical center, while Jamie had landed a software development job with a technology startup. We still gathered for dinner once a week, often at my apartment since I had the most space and the best kitchen. Our conversations had evolved from discussions of how to stretch grocery budgets to sharing professional achievements and future goals. We had become living proof that family isn't defined by biology, but by people who support each other through challenges and celebrate each other's successes. I was also developing friendships with colleagues at Morrison & Associates, particularly with Thomas Morrison's son Daniel, who had joined the firm as a junior partner after completing his MBA at Northwestern University. Daniel was thoughtful and intellectually curious with a quiet sense of humor that emerged once he became comfortable around new people. He often worked late hours developing investment strategies for the firm's high-net-worth clients, and we frequently found ourselves discussing market trends and business philosophy during evening work sessions. I learned that Daniel struggled with anxiety and perfectionism, often second-guessing his investment recommendations, even when his analysis was thorough and well-reasoned. He had grown up feeling pressure to live up to his father's reputation in the financial industry, and he sometimes questioned whether his success was earned through merit or family connections. Our professional relationship gradually became a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared intellectual interests. Daniel never made me feel like he was talking down to me because of my non-traditional educational background, and I appreciated his willingness to consider alternative perspectives on complex financial problems. By my 7th year with Morrison & Associates, I had been promoted to senior partner, the youngest person in the firm's history to achieve that level. My annual salary had reached $140,000, plus substantial bonuses tied to client outcomes. I was financially secure, professionally respected, and personally fulfilled in ways that 18-year-old me could never have imagined. The rejection and dismissal I had experienced from my parents had ultimately led me to discover capabilities and opportunities that might have remained hidden if my path had been easier. But I still carried questions about family forgiveness and whether success could ever truly heal the wounds of childhood betrayal. Those questions were about to be answered in ways I never anticipated. 8 years after leaving home, I received an unexpected reminder that my family's life continued without me. A college friend named Lisa, who still lived in our hometown, forwarded a wedding invitation she'd received that included my name on the guest list as Chloe's sister. The elegant cream-colored cardstock announced the marriage of Chloe Marie Henderson to Daniel James Morrison, with the ceremony scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in June at St. Catherine's Catholic Church, followed by a reception at Willowbrook Country Club. I read the groom's name 3 times before the connection registered fully. Daniel James Morrison, Thomas Morrison's son. My business partner and close friend was marrying my sister, and neither of them had any idea about our family connection. I sat in my office the next morning staring at the invitation propped against my computer monitor, trying to process the implications of this discovery. Daniel Morrison, the thoughtful and intellectually curious man I had worked alongside for 3 years, was engaged to marry Chloe, the sister who had received every advantage and opportunity that I had been denied. The irony was almost overwhelming. The Morrison family had given me the career break that transformed my life, while my own family had rejected my potential and dismissed my value. Now, those 2 families were about to be joined through marriage. I wondered how much Daniel knew about Chloe's family background and whether my parents had mentioned having a second daughter who had left home years earlier. Given their behavior when I lived there, I suspected they rarely talked about me preferring to focus on Chloe's artistic achievements and social success. Around noon, Daniel knocked on my office door carrying 2 cups of coffee from the bistro downstairs. This had become our informal tradition when either of us needed to discuss complex cases or simply take a break from intense analytical work. "I have some personal news to share," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a nervous smile. "I'm getting married in 6 weeks." I accepted the coffee, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Congratulations, Daniel. Tell me about your fiancée." His face lit up with genuine happiness. "Her name is Chloe Henderson. She's an artist incredibly talented and creative. We met at a gallery opening downtown about 1.5 years ago. She was displaying a series of paintings inspired by local architecture, and her work was absolutely stunning." I nodded encouragingly, though hearing him describe Chloe's artistic success brought back familiar feelings of being overshadowed by my sister's talents. "She comes from a wonderful, supportive family," Daniel continued. "Her parents own a small business, a chain of grocery stores in the area. They've been incredibly welcoming to me, treating me like a son from the first time Chloe brought me home for dinner." The description of my parents as wonderful and supportive felt like a physical blow to my chest. Apparently, they had mastered the art of being loving parents when it mattered for their preferred daughter's relationship prospects. "They sound like lovely people," I managed to say. "They are. Chloe's father, Robert, has been mentoring me on small business operations, which has been invaluable for my work with family-owned companies. And her mother, Patricia, is one of the warmest, most nurturing people I've ever met. They've really helped me work through some of the anxiety and self-doubt issues I've struggled with since college." I felt nauseated hearing Daniel describe my parents with such affection and gratitude. The parents who had dismissed my dreams and refused to invest in my future were apparently capable of being wonderful mentors and supportive figures when it served their interests. "That's beautiful, Daniel. Family support can make such a difference during major life transitions." "Exactly. I actually credit Chloe and her family with helping me overcome some dark periods in my life. There was a time a few years ago when I was really struggling with depression and anxiety, questioning whether I was cut out for this career or if I was just riding on my father's reputation." He paused, looking thoughtful. "I went through a really difficult patch where I wasn't sure life was worth continuing. But having people who believed in me unconditionally made all the difference. Chloe's family taught me what genuine love and acceptance look like." The revelation that Daniel had struggled with serious depression and suicidal thoughts shifted my perspective entirely. While I had been focused on the unfairness of my parents treating him better than they had treated me, I realized that Daniel's need for family support had been desperate and real. My parents had likely saved his life through their acceptance and encouragement, even if they had failed to provide that same support to their own daughter. "I'm glad you found people who recognized your value," I said sincerely. "The wedding is going to be relatively small, mostly close family and friends. I'd love for you to meet Chloe sometime soon. I think you two would really connect over your shared work ethic and determination." I nearly choked on my coffee. "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, I struggled with whether to reveal my family connection to Daniel before the wedding. Part of me wanted to protect him from potential complications, while another part of me was curious to observe my family's dynamics from an outside perspective. I ultimately decided to attend the wedding anonymously, remaining in the background to assess the situation before making any decisions about revealing my identity. I suspected my appearance had changed enough over 8 years that my parents might not recognize me immediately, especially if I dressed differently than they remembered. I purchased an elegant navy blue dress with a sophisticated cut that emphasized my professional confidence rather than youthful inexperience. I had my hair styled in a sleek updo and wore minimal jewelry, creating a polished appearance that reflected my current social and financial status. The week before the wedding, I made arrangements to stay at a hotel near the country club, planning to attend the reception briefly and leave if the situation became uncomfortable. I wasn't seeking confrontation or drama, but I wanted to witness this intersection of my past and present firsthand. I had no intention of disrupting Daniel and Chloe's special day, but I was intensely curious about how my family would react to seeing the person they had dismissed and rejected now transformed into someone who couldn't be easily overlooked or discounted. As I prepared for the weekend that would force my past and present to collide, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating conversation around my parents' kitchen table 8 years earlier. The 18-year-old girl who had left home with 2 suitcases and $4,000 had become a successful professional with substantial influence and financial resources. But I still carried questions about forgiveness, family relationships, and whether success could provide the emotional healing I had been seeking all these years. Those questions were about to be answered in ways I couldn't possibly have anticipated. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, held in the historic stone chapel, where generations of prominent local families had celebrated their marriages. I sat in the back row, wearing sunglasses despite being indoors, watching Chloe walk down the aisle in a stunning silk gown that probably cost more than my first year's rent in that studio apartment above the laundromat. She looked radiant and confident, every inch the successful artist who had fulfilled her family's expectations and investment. Her paintings decorated the reception hall, elegant landscapes, and architectural studies that showcased genuine talent and professional training. Daniel stood at the altar looking nervous but happy, his eyes never leaving Chloe as she approached. Thomas Morrison sat in the front row, with his wife beaming with paternal pride at his son's obvious joy. My parents occupied seats of honor on the bride's side, both dressed in expensive formal wear that suggested their financial situation had improved since I'd purchased their debt. Dad wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, while Mom was elegant in a dusty rose dress with pearl accessories. They looked successful, dignified, and completely at ease in the social setting of country club elegance. No one observing them would suspect they were months away from losing their home and business to foreclosure. The ceremony proceeded without incident, and I followed the other guests to the reception hall for cocktails and dinner. I positioned myself at a table near the back, partially obscured by floral arrangements, where I could observe without drawing attention. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Chloe and Daniel moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, clearly happy and surrounded by people who cared about their future together. The Morrison family and my parents seemed to have genuinely warm relationships, laughing together over shared stories and inside jokes. I found myself feeling genuinely pleased for Chloe's happiness despite our complicated family history. She had found someone who appreciated her artistic talents and treated her with obvious love and respect. Daniel appeared to be a kind and thoughtful partner who would support her career ambitions and creative pursuits. But the peaceful anonymity I had maintained ended abruptly when I stood up to visit the restroom and found myself face to face with my parents as they returned from the bar. Dad saw me first, his expression shifting from social pleasantness to shocked recognition to immediate disgust. He grabbed Mom's elbow and whispered something urgently in her ear. Her face went through the same progression of emotions, ending with a cold fury I remembered from childhood arguments. They approached me with deliberate steps, their earlier warmth and social grace replaced by barely contained hostility. "What are you doing here?" Dad demanded in a harsh whisper. "I was invited," I replied quietly, trying not to attract attention from nearby guests. "Invited by whom you have no connection to this family celebration." Mom stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You've been gone for 8 years without a word of contact. Now you show up uninvited to your sister's wedding wearing expensive clothes and acting like you belong here. I received an invitation through college friends who are on Chloe's guest list." "That invitation was clearly a mistake," Dad said coldly. "You are not welcome at this celebration." Other guests were beginning to notice the tense conversation, though they couldn't hear the specific words being exchanged. I saw curious glances and subtle head turns as people tried to understand what was happening. Mom's voice rose slightly above a whisper. "You abandoned this family when you chose your stubborn independence over accepting our guidance. Now you want to insert yourself back into our lives during important moments. I'm not trying to insert myself anywhere. I simply wanted to wish Chloe happiness on her wedding day. Your presence here is inappropriate and unwanted," Dad stated firmly. The conversation had attracted enough attention that Chloe noticed the commotion from across the room. She approached our small group with a concerned expression, clearly trying to understand why her parents appeared upset. "Mom, Dad, is everything okay?" she asked, looking between them and me with confusion. "Everything is fine, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice immediately softening. "We're just dealing with an unexpected guest situation." Chloe looked at me more carefully, studying my face with growing recognition. "Earnestine. Oh my goodness, is that really you?" Her voice carried across the immediate area, and several nearby guests turned to observe our family reunion with open curiosity. "Hello, Chloe," I said simply. "Congratulations on your marriage. Daniel seems like a wonderful man." "I can't believe you're here. You look amazing, so professional and polished. What have you been doing all these years?" Before I could answer, Dad interrupted sharply. "Chloe, we need to return to your reception guests. This is not the time or place for family discussions." But our conversation had already attracted the attention of the one person I had hoped to avoid until I decided how to handle the situation. Daniel approached our group with a puzzled expression, clearly trying to understand why his new in-laws appeared distressed. "Is everything all right over here?" he asked, looking between the Henderson family members with concern. "Daniel, I'd like you to meet my sister Earnestine," Chloe said before our parents could prevent the introduction. "She's been away for several years, and we've lost touch." Daniel extended his hand toward me with a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, Earnestine. I'm sorry we haven't had the chance to meet before today." As I reached out to shake his hand, our eyes met directly for the first time that evening. I watched his expression change from polite formality to shocked recognition to complete disbelief. He stared at me for several long seconds, his hand frozen in mine, his face becoming increasingly pale. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're the woman from the bridge." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I had no idea what he was referring to, but his reaction suggested something far more significant than a casual previous meeting. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" Chloe asked, looking between us with growing confusion. But Daniel was no longer paying attention to his new wife or his wedding reception. He was staring at me with an intensity that made everyone around us uncomfortable. 3 years ago," he said, his voice growing stronger and more certain. "You talked me down from the Riverside Bridge when I was going to jump. You spent 4 hours with me in the middle of the night and you saved my life." The memory came flooding back instantly. It had been a cold February night, and I was driving home late from the office when I saw a figure standing on the wrong side of the bridge railing. I had pulled over without thinking, approaching carefully and talking to the young man about everything and nothing until he agreed to climb back to safety. He had been in crisis, convinced that his life had no value and that his family would be better off without the burden of his failures and anxiety. I had talked to him about second chances, about how the darkest moments often preceded unexpected opportunities for growth and change. I had never given him my real name, and he had been too distressed that night to ask detailed questions about my background. After driving him to the emergency room and staying until his father arrived, I had left quietly, convinced that he wouldn't remember our conversation clearly once he began healing from his crisis. "You never told me your name that night." Daniel continued, his voice filled with awe and emotion. "You just said to call you Annie. I've thought about you every single day since then, wondering who you were and how I could ever thank you for giving me my life back." Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Daniel, you never told me that someone talked you down from the bridge. You just said you got help during your crisis." "I didn't want to burden you with the details of how bad things had gotten," he said, still looking at me with wonder. "But this woman, your sister, she's the reason I'm alive today. She's the reason I was emotionally healthy enough to fall in love with you and build a life together." My parents had gone completely silent, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching shock as they began to understand the implications of Daniel's revelation. Thomas Morrison had somehow appeared beside us, drawn by the commotion and his parental instinct to protect his son during important moments. He looked between Daniel and me with growing understanding. "Ernestine," he said quietly, "you're the anonymous angel that Daniel has talked about for 3 years." "I had no idea he was your son when I stopped that night," I said honestly. "I just saw someone who needed help." Daniel suddenly stepped forward and embraced me tightly, completely forgetting the formal wedding reception environment. "Thank you," he whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you for giving me the chance to have this life, this love, this family." I hugged him back, feeling tears I hadn't expected beginning to form. "I'm so glad you chose to stay, Daniel. Look at all the beautiful things that became possible because you didn't give up." When we separated, I realized that every guest in our immediate vicinity had stopped their conversations to watch this unexpected reunion. The soft classical music continued playing, but our corner of the reception hall had become an island of intense emotion in the middle of elegant celebration. Chloe was crying openly now, looking at me with an expression I had never seen from her before, deep respect mixed with gratitude. "You saved my husband's life," she said through her tears. "Ernestine, I had no idea you were capable of something so incredible." Mom and Dad stood frozen, clearly struggling to process this complete reversal of their narrative about my character and value. The daughter they had dismissed as stubborn and ungrateful had anonymously saved the life of the man who became their son-in-law, making their current family happiness possible. But before anyone could say anything more, Thomas Morrison stepped forward with a smile that suggested he was enjoying this revelation immensely. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a voice loud enough to address the entire reception hall, "I believe it's time for me to share something important about one of our guests." Thomas Morrison moved to the center of the reception hall, tapping his champagne glass with a dinner knife to gather everyone's attention. The classical quartet stopped playing, and conversation gradually ceased as wedding guests turned toward him expectantly. "Thank you all for joining Daniel and Chloe on this wonderful day," He began, his voice carrying easily through the elegant space. As the father of the groom, I had planned to give a traditional speech about love and marriage, but something extraordinary has just happened that I believe deserves recognition. He gestured toward where I stood with my family, my heart pounding, as I realized he was about to expose my professional identity to everyone present. 3 years ago, my son Daniel went through the darkest period of his life. Many of you know that he struggled with depression and anxiety after college, questioning his worth and his future. What you may not know is that during his lowest moment, when he was seriously considering ending his life, a stranger showed him extraordinary compassion and literally saved him. Daniel moved closer to me, his face glowing with emotion and gratitude. That stranger spent hours talking with him, helping him find reasons to choose life over death, and ensuring he received professional help. Daniel has often said that meeting this person was the turning point that made everything else possible, including his recovery, his career success, and his relationship with Chloe. Thomas Morrison paused, allowing the significance of his words to settle over the crowd. What we discovered tonight is that this anonymous angel has been part of our extended family all along. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Earnestine Henderson's senior partner at Morrison, and associates, one of the most brilliant financial analysts in the region, and the woman who gave my son his life back when he needed it most. Gasps and murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Several guests recognized my name from business newspapers and professional conferences, while others simply responded to the dramatic revelation of the connection between Daniel's mysterious rescuer and his new sister-in-law. But there's more. Thomas Morrison continued, clearly enjoying the moment. Over the past 5 years, Earnestine has been responsible for saving dozens of family businesses throughout our community. Her innovative approaches to financial restructuring have prevented countless bankruptcies and preserved hundreds of jobs. He began pointing to various guests throughout the reception hall. Jim, she's the analyst who saved your restaurant chain from foreclosure 3 years ago. Sarah, she restructured your boutique's debt and helped you expand to 4 locations. Michael, she guided your construction company through the economic downturn and positioned you for your current success. More gasps and surprised recognition spread through the crowd as people realized they were in the presence of the woman who had anonymously rescued their livelihoods and financial security. Many of you have benefited directly from Ernestine's expertise and dedication, often without knowing her name or having the opportunity to thank her personally. She's been a guardian angel for our entire business community, working behind the scenes to strengthen families and preserve dreams. I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the public recognition and the warmth of appreciation flowing from people whose cases I had handled over the years. Several guests began approaching me with hands extended, eager to express gratitude they had never been able to share. "Thank you for saving our family farm," an elderly woman said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We never knew who was responsible for the restructuring plan that kept us from losing everything. Your analysis saved my manufacturing company and 47 jobs," a middle-aged man added, shaking my hand vigorously. "My employees still have their health insurance because of your work." The recognition continued for several minutes, with guest after guest approaching to share stories of how my professional interventions had preserved their businesses, protected their employees, or maintained their family financial security. Throughout this outpouring of gratitude, my parents stood motionless beside Chloe, their faces cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. The daughter they had dismissed as financially irresponsible and professionally worthless had become one of the most respected business analysts in the region. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. "There's one more thing," Thomas Morrison announced, recapturing the crowd's attention. "Ernestine's most recent case involved a struggling family grocery business facing bankruptcy. Through her expertise in strategic planning, she's currently working to save Henderson Family Markets from foreclosure." Dad's face went completely white. Mom grabbed onto a nearby chair for support. They suddenly understood that their mysterious financial advisor, the professional who had offered debt restructuring services through legal intermediaries, was their own daughter. "Henderson Family Markets belongs to Chloe's parents," Thomas Morrison continued, "which means Earnestine has been anonymously working to save her own family's business and protect her parents' home from foreclosure, even though they haven't spoken in 8 years. The reception hall fell completely silent, except for the soft sound of Mom beginning to sob. "Robert and Patricia Henderson," Thomas Morrison said, gently looking directly at my parents. "Your daughter has been your guardian angel twice over. She saved your son-in-law's life, and she's been working to save your financial future." Dad sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. The weight of understanding what he had lost through his rejection and cruelty was written across his entire posture. "I don't understand," Mom whispered, looking at me through her tears. "Why would you help us after the way we treated you?" Before I could answer, Chloe stepped forward, her voice breaking with emotion. "Because that's who she is," Chloe said, her words carrying clearly through the quiet hall. "Ernestine has always been the strongest, most generous person in our family, and I was too young and selfish to appreciate her." She turned toward me, her wedding dress rustling against the polished floor. "I let Mom and Dad convince me that your leaving was about stubbornness and ingratitude, but I knew it wasn't true. I knew they were treating you unfairly, and I stayed silent because it benefited me. I've felt guilty about that for 8 years. Chloe's voice grew stronger as she continued. "While I was spending their money on art supplies and gallery submissions, you were building a career that would eventually save entire communities of families. While I was accepting praise for paintings, you were preventing people from losing their homes and businesses." She looked around the reception hall at all the grateful faces focused on me. "Everyone in this room has benefited either directly or indirectly from my sister's brilliance and compassion. She's been protecting and serving this community while our family acted like she didn't exist." Dad finally looked up, his eyes red with tears I had never seen him shed. "Ernestine," he said, his voice barely audible, "I don't know how to begin apologizing for what we did to you, or how to thank you for what you've done for us." Mom added, stepping closer despite her obvious shame and remorse. The entire reception had become an impromptu moment of family reconciliation, with 200 guests serving as witnesses to confession's gratitude and the possibility of healing relationships that had been broken for nearly a decade. I looked around the room at faces filled with respect, appreciation, and expectation. Daniel stood beside me with obvious pride and continued amazement. Chloe waited with hopeful tears for my response to our parents' unprecedented vulnerability. Thomas Morrison smiled encouragingly, clearly proud of the moment he had created by revealing my professional identity and community contributions. But the most important moment was yet to come, my decision about how to respond to this public reckoning with my past, and whether forgiveness was possible after so many years of pain and rejection. Standing in the center of that reception hall, surrounded by 200 people waiting to hear my response to my parents' apologies, I felt the weight of 8 years of pain and success converging into a single moment of choice. I could have used this public revelation as an opportunity for revenge, exposing the full extent of their cruelty and rejection while basking in the community's recognition of my achievements. I could have detailed every hurtful word they had spoken, every opportunity they had denied me, every way they had favored Chloe over me. Instead, I thought about the young man I had talked down from a bridge 3 years earlier and how despair had convinced him that his life had no value. I thought about all the families whose businesses I had rescued and how financial crisis had temporarily made them forget their own strength and resilience. I thought about Maria and Jamie, my chosen family, who had supported me through community college and celebrated every professional milestone. I thought about the mentorship Thomas Morrison had provided, seeing potential in a 19-year-old night janitor that even her own parents had missed. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. I stopped on that bridge 3 years ago because I recognized the look in Daniel's eyes. It was the same hopelessness I felt the night I left home, convinced that I had no value to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I paused, gathering my thoughts and choosing my words carefully. For 8 years, I've carried anger and hurt about the way you dismissed my dreams and refused to invest in my potential. I've wondered whether I left home to punish you or to prove you wrong, or simply to survive. Dad wiped his eyes, unable to meet my gaze directly. But tonight, seeing Daniel's joy and Chloe's happiness, I realize that holding on to that pain serves no purpose for any of us. The question isn't whether you were wrong about my character or potential 8 years ago. The question is whether we can build something honest and healthy moving forward. I looked around the reception hall at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by my work, drawing strength from their visible support and appreciation. I forgive you for the ways you failed me as parents. I forgive the favoritism, the financial discrimination, and the emotional rejection. Not because those actions were acceptable, but because forgiveness is the only path towards something better. Mom began sobbing harder, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her cheeks. But, I continued, my voice growing firmer, forgiveness doesn't mean returning to old patterns or pretending that serious harm wasn't done. If we're going to rebuild any kind of family relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect and honest acknowledgement of past mistakes. I turned toward Thomas Morrison, who was watching the proceedings with obvious emotional investment. "Thomas, I'd like to make a public announcement about Henderson Family Markets." He nodded encouragingly. "Effective immediately, I'm transferring ownership of Henderson Family Markets debt back to my parents at 0% interest with payment terms extended over 15 years. This will allow them to retain both their business and their home while making manageable monthly payments." Gasps of amazement and appreciation rose from the crowd. Several people began applauding, recognizing the generosity and grace of this gesture. However, I continued, looking directly at my parents. "I have conditions for this arrangement." Dad straightened, preparing to accept whatever requirements I might impose. "First, you will attend family counseling sessions with a professional therapist to address the patterns of favoritism and emotional neglect that damaged our relationship. This isn't punishment. It's education about how to build healthier family dynamics." They both nodded immediately. "Second, you will volunteer for 10 hours monthly at the Community Financial Literacy Center, helping other families avoid the debt management problems that nearly cost you your home. Your experience with financial crisis should be used to help others learn better planning strategies." "Of course," Mom whispered. "Third, You will establish a college scholarship fund in Henderson Family Market's name, providing educational support for students whose families cannot afford tuition assistance. The scholarship will specifically target academically gifted students who demonstrate financial need. This condition carried obvious symbolism related to my own denied college funding, but it was framed as community service rather than personal restitution. And finally, I said, my voice softening slightly, you will never again speak disparagingly about any family member in public or private. Our relationships will be built on support and encouragement, or they won't exist at all. Dad stood up slowly, his formal suit wrinkled from emotional strain, and approached me with hesitant steps. Ernestine, those conditions are more than fair. They're generous beyond anything we deserve. You're our daughter, Mom added, stepping beside him. We should have been proud of your strength and determination instead of punishing you for independence. We should have celebrated your achievements instead of dismissing your potential. You were always the most capable person in our family, Chloe said, joining our group. I was too insecure about my own abilities to acknowledge how extraordinary you were becoming. Daniel moved closer as well, his arm around his new wife's shoulders. Ernestine, you've given me and Chloe the greatest wedding gift possible, a second chance for your family to build the relationships you all deserve. I hugged each of them, feeling years of tension and resentment beginning to dissolve into something that might eventually become genuine affection and respect. Thomas Morrison approached our group with a broad smile. I believe this calls for a toast, he announced to the reception hall. To second chances, to forgiveness, and to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The entire crowd raised their glasses, and I felt surrounded by a community of people who had supported my professional growth and were now witnessing my personal healing. Over the following months, my parents fulfilled every condition I had established. They attended weekly counseling sessions, learning to recognize and change the favoritism patterns that had damaged our family relationships. They volunteered enthusiastically at the Financial Literacy Center, discovering fulfillment in helping other families avoid debt crises. The Henderson Family Scholarship Fund became a community success story, providing college assistance to 12 students in its first year. My parents took pride in reviewing applications and meeting scholarship recipients, finally understanding the impact that educational support could have on young people's futures. Most importantly, they learned to celebrate both their daughters' achievements, equally attending my professional conferences and Chloe's art exhibitions with equal enthusiasm and support. Chloe and I developed a genuine friendship for the first time in our lives, built on mutual respect rather than sibling rivalry. She often sought my advice about financial planning for her art business, while I appreciated her creative perspective on work-life balance and personal fulfillment. Daniel became not just a business partner, but a true friend whose gratitude for that night on the bridge created a bond that extended far beyond professional collaboration. He and Chloe often invited me for dinner, and our conversations ranged from investment strategies to philosophy to family dynamics. Maria and Jamie remained my closest chosen family, but I also began building relationships with my biological family that were healthier and more honest than anything we had shared during my childhood. A year after the wedding, I was promoted to managing partner at Morrison & Associates, overseeing the firm's expansion into 3 neighboring states. My specialty in family business rescue had become a model program that other financial firms were adopting throughout the region. But the greatest measure of my success wasn't professional recognition or financial security. It was the peace I felt knowing that I had chosen forgiveness over revenge, healing over bitterness, and hope over despair. The 18-year-old girl who had left home with 2 suitcases and a broken heart had become a woman capable of transforming pain into compassion, rejection into resilience, and betrayal into the wisdom necessary to build something better. I had learned that true independence isn't about rejecting all connections or proving your worth through isolation. Real independence is having the strength to set healthy boundaries, the wisdom to distinguish between people who deserve your trust and those who don't, and the grace to offer second chances when genuine change becomes possible. Standing in my office one evening looking out at the city lights where so many families were building their dreams and facing their challenges, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that devastating conversation around my parents' kitchen table to this moment of professional success and personal peace. The rejection that had once felt like the end of my world had become the beginning of discovering capabilities and compassion I might never have developed if my path had been easier. The family that had broken my heart had eventually learned to celebrate my strength, and the community that had embraced my professional contributions had witnessed the healing power of forgiveness. I had built a life that was meaningful, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest, generous, and grounded in the understanding that everyone deserves second chances when they demonstrate genuine commitment to growth and change. Most importantly, I had learned that family can be chosen as well as inherited. Success is meaningless without genuine human connections, and the greatest victories come not from proving other people wrong, but from becoming the person you were always meant to be. The girl who was told to be independent had discovered that true independence means having the strength to build the life you want, while maintaining the compassion to help others do the same. Have you ever experienced a moment when family rejection led you to discover strength you didn't know you possessed? I'd love to hear your stories about turning painful experiences into opportunities for growth and success. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience, family relationships, and the power of forgiveness. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need a reminder that their current struggles could be preparing them for future victories they can't yet imagine. Thank you for joining me today, and remember that sometimes the people who underestimate you are actually giving you the greatest gift possible, the chance to prove to yourself just how extraordinary you can become.